All righty. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And yes, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. Our guest tonight is returning champion Joe Emersberger, who is a Canadian media critic, NGO critic, anti-imperialist campaigner, outspoken leftist, and he's a regular contributor to fair.org, which is America's leading media critic organization, ZenNet. And he is the co-author of Extraordinary Threat: 20 Years of, well, I'm not paraphrasing the title correctly, but 20 years of basically lies of corporate media when it comes to Venezuela, which he did with Justin Trudeau. I'm half right on that, right, Joe?
Yeah, it's 20 years of coup attempts against Venezuela. The empire
Exactly.
of the media, yeah. The empire of the media and 20 years of coup attempts against Venezuela. Yeah.
Exactly. And on this Armistice Day, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with Joe, because a couple of months ago, I think even this must have been even a year or two, roughly, Joe had done, well, we're going to get into it. Joe had done a review on Mein Kampf, Hitler's political, Adolf Hitler's political manifesto, where he lays out his his political philosophy and so forth. Joe has read the book so that many of us don't have to read it. And but in order to understand history, and since we live in a world which is obsessed with World War II, I actually think it's healthy to revisit that book. And well, anyways, we're going to talk about it. And I think it's gonna open up an interesting Pandora's box of so many different topics if we want when it comes to the terrible state of the world today. So first off, Joe, thank you for coming back on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always an honor to have you. And yeah, I guess my first question would be what made you actually want to write this review of Mein Kampf? Before we talk about some of the content that you addressed in your review.
Yeah, I just thought it would be an interesting study to clarify things because, I over the past few years, I've basically reevaluated a lot of my political positions on many historical figures. So I wanted to actually dive into the book, read it for myself, take detailed notes, and then summarize what I thought was the gist of it. So that was, I believe, now 2 years ago now. It's up on redsales.org. It's a site that has a lot of good content, Marxist content of all
Exactly.
various types. Anyway, so it's up there and people can read it. And yeah, so I went through the book. It's 600 pages long. It's 2 volumes, 600 pages total of Adolf Hitler's rantings and ravings. It's grim reading, as you'd expect. He's a humorless, fanatical racist. His book is entirely racist from the beginning to the end. I mean, it's if you took the racism out of Mein Kampf, you'd have nothing but the front and back cover. That's how racist it is. It's but a lot of interesting things that came out of it for me was just how much he admired for example, that he just loved the British Empire. He actually advocated that, as I said in the review, that he said that Germany should have subordinated itself to Britain during the First World War. That it was very
Oh,
stupid.
really?
That it was very stupid to go to war against Britain. That we should have been willing to be subordinate to them for a number. Now, he didn't think he should be subordinate forever, but he said that was a necessary price of eventually achieving greatness. He thought Germany could eventually surpass them, but he never in the book, even when he said surpass them, he never indicated that he wanted to destroy the other so-called white nations of Europe, with the possible exception of France. But what he definitely made clear was that he wanted to destroy and enslave the Slavic populations of the Soviet Union at that time. He wanted to destroy the Soviet Union and enslave its people and make them into second-class subjects of the German superstate that he wanted to build right in Europe. See, he didn't think it was practical for Germany to go to war for colonies all over the world. he thought it was much more practical for Germany to bring European colonialism right into Europe, and to do to the Slavic peoples what the other Europeans had done throughout Latin America and Africa, well, in Germany as well, but not on the same scale as what Britain, obviously, and France and all the others were able to achieve. So that's what his whole book was about. And yeah, so he's basically a colonialist. The exceptional, we one thing that's a mistake in analyzing Hitler, in the way we're taught about World War II and about Hitler, is where we exceptionalize him in a way. Well, he was exceptional. Well, certainly the scale of his murder and everything, because World War II killed 2 million people. I mean, that was exceptional in that way, because it was a war on European soil among Europeans. So it was going to be a incredibly bloody affair. However, he was not a one-time freak that appeared out of nowhere. He was just he was an extension of he was a product of and a proponent of Western imperialism. In fact, the title of my review is that Mein Kampf was like Hitler's love letter to Western imperialism. That's what he was all. He was a Western imperialist. And the other thing that I wanted to stress to people was that his anti-communism and his anti-Semitism, or his anti-Jewish views, were intricately linked. You can't really separate them. He saw Marxism as well. He saw as a product of the evil Jew Karl Marx, who did it all for his race, who wanted to make sure that the Jewish race, as he saw it, he saw Judaism as a race, not as a religion. And he said that Marxism was basically a Jewish plot to basically take control over the opposition to financial capital. So he said, like, yeah, sure. That of course, he said the Jews are financiers and all this, the typical tropes that any anti-Semite throws out there, that the Jews run the world's banks and everything. But also he said that their sinister idea was that not only will we control the banks, but we'll also control the opposition to the banks. I mean, we'll also control the so-called opposition. It'll be like a fake opposition that's really penetrated with. So it's all just one big plot for total world domination by what he called was the Jewish race. So he actually referred to Judaism and Marxism as the twin evils. There were twin evils. Throughout the book, he makes clear that Marxism must be eradicated by force. In fact, one of his most explicitly genocidal comments is directed against Marxism. He says Marxism must be eradicated by force. That it has to be eradicated by force, and that's possible as long as there's a new idea, a new Weltanschauung, as he called it, a new ideology that would take its place. And so that's what he was providing in this 2 volumes of just ranting and raving. And yeah, so he was fanatically anti-Marxist and anti-Semitic, and you can't separate the two. They were both intimately linked. So that I think is another important thing that people have to understand about him, because he saw Marxism as, in his explanation, Marxism teaches people to have class solidarity, and he just thought that was an abomination. It's essential for people, he thought, to have racial solidarity. That had to be taken. In fact, he explicitly said the state is a racial organism. That's how he defined the state. They said the state is a racial organ. That is its reason to be. Its goal, its overriding priority has to be to improve the race. Okay, that's what he said the goal of a state is. So his race is at the center of his whole worldview, right? Obviously, the whole notion that the Germans are superior, and also that the races have to be pure, and ultimately the master race has to be the one that wins, right? He says he has this kind of resources are scarce. So there's no other choice but to fight it out. The races have to fight it out for who gets the resources. So the superior race is the one that wins. It's pretty simple, right? So, and he pointed approvingly to North America as an example where the white race, he said, dominates the Americas. and that would be the case. The white race will continue to dominate the Western Hemisphere as long as they don't intermingle too much, as long as they don't intermingle too much. And there's all sorts of the typical just incredible derogatory racism towards Africans, comparing them to dogs. Uh, Interestingly, one point too is there were people within the fascist movement who advocated forming strategic alliances with people in India, because
Yes. Yeah.
right wing forces in India they thought could be allied with the Nazis, and Hitler was very, very dismissive of those ideas in Mein Kampf. And he said, first of all, these people that they're telling us to ally with don't really have much power. They're irrelevant and it's a waste of time. But then he also mentioned, and second of all, as a German, I want to see the British dominate India. So it goes back again to his level of the British Empire and of Britain and of all. He saw them as brothers, although he had to fight them, but he thought ultimately there could be an accommodation made. He said maybe they would make them subordinate, but he did not he in the way he actually advocated Germany be subordinate for a time to Britain. But his respect for Britain is just all over Mein Kampf, for his respect for their empire. And so I found that interesting that he said, no, and frankly, as a German, I want to see the British dominate India, and in fact, and he mentioned also in one part of the book, he talks about Britain's made some kind of alliances with Imperial Japan. And he says, those were understandable, even if they were racially unforgivable. But he said it kind of foreshadowed the alliance he would make with Imperial Japan, right? So he's again, what comes out loud and clear is he's a Western imperialist, fanatically anti-communist, as well as anti-Semitic. But I think those are the things that when you get that when you read his book, then you realize how he is a Western imperialist, and you have to see him in that perspective to properly understand him, and not caricature him in a way that makes him such a freak that he becomes that his relevance to what's going on today, for example, in Gaza, becomes lost. That's why I always make that's why I make a point of always referring to Israel as Nazi Israel. I make and it's not a point that I came up with. It's a point that an anti-Zionist Jew, a Holocaust survivor, said in 2014. He said, we call the Zionists what they are, Nazis. Okay, that's what he said. And actually, that's one of the first people Corbyn betrayed, because Corbyn attended some kind of conference or event with this I forget his name. I'm sorry, I forget his name, but he's a Holocaust.
If memory serves me well, because we both were into UK politics at the time when Jeremy Corbyn was there. We were both following a lot of the postings of Media Lens, the kind of British equivalent to Fair.org, and I believe it was I believe Corbyn was being attacked for a demonstration he had attended with this Holocaust survivor who explicitly, he's a Holocaust survivor, and he explicitly described how Israel treats the Palestinian people as Nazis and so forth.
He said they're Nazis. He said, call them what they are, call them Nazis. And at the time, I got to say, to be honest, at the time, I thought, okay, I sympathize. I think, maybe, Hitler is so exceptional that maybe that's not appropriate. And now, after reading Mein Kampf, even then I thought, no, that is appropriate. We got these people are very Nazified. I mean, we have the entire Parliament of Canada give a standing ovation to a Nazi, right? Why was that Nazi even there? Because Canada gave safe haven to so many Nazis after World War II, and not just gave them safe haven, but allowed them to become wealthy and politically influential. And that's why they're now they've had to remove like hundreds of names from one memorial to some anti-communist memorial. They came out there with all maybe were Nazi war criminals that they had to remove the names, take down the memorial. I mean, this is really exposing the Nazified nature of our political systems in the West. And that's something I didn't grasp until at the time that happened in 2014, when that gentleman made those remarks. I thought, okay, I sympathize, but I thought maybe that was a bit too far. But no, he was right on target. He was exactly correct. And I think reading Mein Kampf, going through the details, I think that helps people understand how appropriate his comments were.
I then have to ask this question because and we're definitely going to return to the fact that that on Twitter you are not afraid to call Israel Nazi Israel, but let's return to that a little bit later and go back to some of the contents in Mein Kampf. Now, in the book, of course, Hitler is a raging anti-Semitic, and I think a lot of people actually don't even really appreciate just how. But I think this goes back to Israel. I think Israel has abused the term anti-Semitism so much. The Zionists have abused the term anti-Semitism so much that a lot of people, if you do talk to them about how anti-Semitism was a very acceptable form of bigotry, both casually on a day-to-day basis, but also institutionally. A lot of people go, "Oh, really? You're going to bring up anti-Semitism?" But no, but it is true. Institutional anti-Semitism was a horrific institution. If we look at Tsarist Russia and some of the different monarchs, sort of proto-fascist societies that existed in Eastern Europe, certainly in the U.S. and in Canada, it may not have been like an institutional element, but there were people that had very, open, bigotry towards Jewish people. Would say casually the most, horrendous things that
Right.
that Jews eat babies, they rip you off. That The Judeo-Bolshevik stuff of Hitler that you described. So, so the question I wanted to ask was, does Hitler explain, apart from the anti-communist hysteria, does he explain why he has this hatred for the Jews? Because I'm wondering if he gives any historical context as to why folks should be anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I think his explanation is that he claims that he wasn't really anti-Semitic until, as a young man, he left Austria and went to he was born and raised in Austria, and then he went to Munich, and in Munich he says that's where he saw Jewish people dressed in some traditional Orthodox Jewish dress, and he was disgusted by it and said, how can this person be a German, be called a German? Uh, but he already in what his remarks, he already makes clear that he was a big supporter of the British war in South Africa. Like, he used to listen to the broadcast eagerly. So he was already, from a young age, you can already see he was already fed the typical Western supremacy, the whole militarism, the worship of brute force, of war. So you could see that he was, by his own account, he was already primed to become quite a. He was already steeped in a racist worldview, and I think what my interpretation would be with that, when he went to Munich, it just became, he just absorbed the anti-Semitism that was already all around him, that was already linked to all those to the imperial worldview.
Did
Uh,
the
and
ideology of Martin Luther, the famous German Protestant, have of the Protestant Reformism, when the Catholic Church influence started to be challenged towards the end of the Middle Ages? Was he influenced by Martin Luther, who was a raging anti-Semitic?
he makes respectful comments, respectful references to Martin Luther, but you don't get the sense that he really gave a damn about religion.
Okay, interesting, interesting.
Yeah, you don't. He what he cared about was military prowess. What comes across more is that he's kind of a racist Malthusian. Like, resources are limited, population is growing too fast. The better race is just going to have to grab the resources, or the inferior race will take them. So the master race has to get the resources it can, or else it just won't survive. So it's like you're going to be a predator, or you're going to be prey. So if you want your race to thrive, you better be prepared to be good predators. And for example, there's an inherent contradiction in his whole worldview that I mentioned. I mentioned this in the review, is that while he saw the so-called Aryans as the master race, as the superior race, he also basically assumed the majority were stupid. Uh, he believed in dumbing down propaganda. He believed education could consist for men mainly of physical fitness. Very, 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 very rudimentary education, basically preparing them to be soldiers, basically preparing them to be fodder. And the women, of course, looking to be just preparing them to provide, to give birth to those healthy soldiers, and that's why his belief in sterilizing and making sure that people with birth defects, that you sterilize them, you make sure that they can't reproduce, because otherwise it dilute the quality of the race. In his view, the quality of soldiers, basically. You have to and now within the so-called master race, he believed that the disabled people should be treated with kindness and everything, but that they should not be allowed to reproduce and thereby lower the quality of your soldiers, is basically what he was worried about. But he basically saw, even within this so-called master race, he did not think, for example, this is why he's so honest in Mein Kampf, so blunt, I should say, is because he didn't expect the overwhelming majority of Aryans to read these 2 volumes. He didn't expect them to plow through 600 pages of his writing. That was something for like a small group of people he thought would do that. He believed in very dumbed down propaganda. He believed in using. Now, this is something I also mentioned, is that he was really obsessed. He realized how popular Marxism was, and so he was obsessed with using some of the terminology and the colors and for example, he called themselves National Socialists, right?
Exactly.
And he says explicitly in the book that he was delighted when certain bourgeois elements would accuse them of being communists. He wasn't horrified. He was happy with that because he wanted that confusion to exist. And obviously, because he was laughing at them for thinking that, because he didn't care that they were confused. In fact, he was worried about, he didn't want to win over the bourgeois. He says explicitly, he wanted the Nazis have to have mass support. He wanted them to have mass support to win over the working class, which had to mean winning them away from the Marxists. And one way to do that was to kind of pay some lip service to things that Marxists talk about. For example, in Mein Kampf, he talks about that there should be workers' compensation. The capitalist class has to take care of the Aryan workers, right? Provide them with a certain basics. Now, many will point out, Michael Perenni pointed out in his excellent book Black Shirts and Reds, when Hitler got into power, he did not follow through on a lot of that rhetoric, but he saw it as important because what he makes clear is that he wanted to win over working class support. He didn't give a damn about intellectual support, or professional class support. He wanted the working class support. He thought that was essential for a mass base. Remember, you wanting to wage war, you have to have an army. You can't just do that appealing to a small group of intellectuals, right? So that was a lot of the things that came out of Mein Kampf too. Those aspects, those contradictions, if you will, but also that so-called trolling of certain elements of the bourgeois society, because he didn't care about it. The Nazis would call each other comrade. They would use the color red, and again, so there's a deliberate confusion that he stimulated himself.
That's very fascinating in and of itself, and many far right grifters still doing that to this day.
Oh, for sure, yeah. They're deliberately, what they're doing is they're deliberately spreading the lie that Hitler wanted spread, that the Nazis were actually socialists. That's a lot of the far right figures we see today are spread that confusion deliberately, because first of all, they don't want to admit to the Nazis being right wing, but they don't want to. They want to somehow equate Stalin to Hitler, and a lot of reasons. They just want to. They're just like Hitler. They want to spread that confusion, but kind of for an opposite reason. Hitler wanted to win, to the Nazis to win support have but through that confusion. Whereas today's right wing grifters, as you call them, they don't want to take ownership of it. They want to deny the historical reality of what Hitler was. So that's why they spread that lie. But it's a Nazi lie, actually.
And funny enough, that whole propaganda that even sometimes well-meaning people, they could be leftists, often anti-communist leftists, but but often when you hear that phrase that Stalin killed more people than Hitler, communism has killed more people than Nazism, that whole lie and argument actually came from the runaway Nazi war criminals and collaborators who went to places like yours, truly Canada. So I have
Yeah.
to ask. So then I have to ask this question though. Hitler's anti-Slavism. I can understand his anti communism uh, because that whole idea that we are all as one, workers of the world must unite to stop the dictatorship of the plutocracy, the bourgeoisie, which is later going to develop itself into the plutocracy and so forth like that, and then for other more radical leftists at the time, that we should not be discriminating against our fellow Jews or our fellow Ukrainians, or some would even say Roma and women and so forth, that we should all be uniting as one working class to fight against this ghastly, grotesque system of capitalism. But where was it a bit? So that said, I understand Hitler's anti-communism, Judeo-Bolshevism, and so forth, but the anti-Slavicism. So folks who come from Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, and then you can even say that many other Eastern European folks are Slavic people. Where did that? Yeah, I'm curious. How does he justify his wanting to eradicate them and build in a living space, as he said in his book?
Well, part of it. I think that hatred stems from a simple necessity that his calculation, Germany was not in a position to steal a lot of the empire away from Britain or from France. He didn't see them as being in a good position to go take colonies in the other parts of the world. He wanted, first of all, said, how can we take? Why can we worry about colonies in other parts of the world when there are Germanic communities in Austria and Czechoslovakia in Europe that he saw as being, or even in Russia, which he specifically mentioned as being oppressed, or as we want to, first of all, we have to get all the Germans in Europe under the same roof, basically steal them away from those countries where they're presently living, and so that's part of it. There's just that practical necessity of having to build a super state in Europe. He just saw that as the practical endeavor, and never mind, we can do those. He basically suggests that that's got to be the colonies in abroad. Those will happen, but that's down the road. We gotta build this German super state in Europe. That's the first priority. So a lot of that hatred
A
is
greater
that,
Germany, then.
yes, a greater Germany. So if you're going to build a greater Germany, what can you say about the peoples you're going to build it over top of? There's a practical necessity to hate them. Well, like why did the racism has a practical motivation, right? You want to steal their land, right? The hatred is linked to the urge to plunder, right? To plunder, to subjugate, right? So that's linked to, it's all linked together. And also, I mean, you just remember that the Soviet Union extended into Asia, right? So that's another reason why a white supremacist like Hitler would see them as racially suspect as well. They say, well, these people they're half Asian, right? Right? They're not.
Mongols. I believe the term Mongols was often used to
Yeah.
sort
So
to sort of like
basically,
shit on Russian culture and
basically seeing
USSR
them as not,
culture.
yeah, basically seeing them as not really European. So just because by virtue of how so much of the Soviet Union extended into Asia, and then also just the fact that, again, the Soviet Union being Marxist, I mean, that would further stimulate the racism, right? Because he saw Marxism as a Jewish plot for Jewish world domination, right? So So of course there are many reasons why that would stimulate his racial hatred of the Slavs.
Interesting. So, it's funny because Russia under the Tsar was often considered, even though many people appreciated the culture that came out of Tsarist Russia. Uh, many of the Russian elites, though, and aristocracy, though, would speak French and even looked down upon their own language. And there, of course, there's vicious anti-Semitism, very vicious anti-Roma policies, but but Tsarist Russia was often seen sort of like the Ottoman Empire towards the end of its period as the sick man of Europe, as being a as being a very backward society, even in the way they treated their subjects, the peasantry, the working class, and so forth. So when that very same regime later was was overthrown, and the communists did take over, led by Lenin, led by Trotsky, led by Stalin, and so forth. Did that give the Western Europeans of a Germany more of a reason to be to just look down upon Russian culture and similar cultures, and of course gave them motivation to be more hostile towards that culture when the USSR took over.
Yeah, well, like I said, Hitler was as fanatical. His anti-Marxism was as fanatical as anti-Semitism or anti-Jewishness. It was intimately linked. You literally could, when you read the book, you can almost not. He jumps between one and the other so effortlessly. It's the same thing in his mind. They're so closely linked. So yeah, definitely that would stimulate that because he saw the Soviet Union as being a successful Jewish accomplishment, right? Of a sinister Jewish accomplishment, part of a world. So he was going to free the world, destroy this entity that he saw as a Jewish creation, right? Because Marxism being a Jewish plot, so yeah, definitely that will all fit into his race hatred.
And talk a bit more about about the Western influence, because you talked about Hitler's love of the British Empire, and indeed, even in the documentaries we had to watch as IB history students when we learned about World War II, my history teacher, Mr. Binns, made us watch some episodes of The World at War, and Hitler just like loves the British Empire. He did not see the British Empire as an enemy. In fact, he thought it was bizarre when he did invade Poland that Churchill and his buddies actually didn't side with him because he really did see them as kindred spirits. So that being said, can you talk to us about the influence of America on his psyche, particularly settler colonialism and manifest destiny, as well as one of the most ghastly movements that developed at that period, which is of course the eugenics movement.
Yeah, well, like I said, he's his mentions of when he mentions the United States, he mentions it. He points to it as an accomplishment of white supremacy. It's the white race dominating all the Americas, and like I said, he thought that would go on and continue as long as they didn't racially dilute themselves with other races. And in fact, he thought France was involved in a plot to bring Africans into Europe in order to dilute the race, to weaken them, to weaken the German race in particular, but the Europeans also. So he saw all those things as everything for him was in terms of race, racial purity, and maintaining the race. So he makes explicit reference to the United States being an accomplishment of white supremacy and the British Empire. Yeah, so he refers to those things constantly.
Unbelievable. And then of course the eugenics movement and that mentality that there are some people who are just born dumb, some people who are born with disabilities, some people who are
Well,
born.
the eugenics, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was an elitist, right? So even within his so-called white, even within the so-called master race, the Aryans, he saw, like I said, he saw the majority as very stupid. as basically they would serve as fodder, as soldiers to expand the superstate, right? And he didn't want them to have very much waste their time giving them much education. He just wanted them to be, so as he put it, real men who could do real fighting, and the women who would stay at home and give birth to the soldiers and the other way. So it was just, they were just the birth units. I mean, so within the Aryan race, he definitely believed in sterilizing people if they were at all so-called quote unquote defective, right? It's because he felt that would dilute their ability to serve as fodder. So he definitely expressed those views in Mein Kampf.
That unbelievable.
Yeah.
And what do you think was the most I think disturbing part of reading Mein Kampf? Were because I'm pretty sure that you were already quite familiar with the ideology of Nazism and fascism. Fascism, I think, is less about the kind of like racial politics and is more about just we got to eradicate our enemies, the communists and the liberals and so forth. But Nazism is very much obsessed with the whole racial hierarchy and so forth. So, but that being so, even knowing all of that, what when you were reading Mein Kampf still made you go, God damn? I'm curious.
I think what I put in my review is just, you know, first of all, I don't think I agree. I think fascism is always inevitably, as we see that today with the incredible race hatred on display towards Palestinians. It's inevitable. The race hatred is there because if you're an expansionist, if you're an empire, if you're expansionist, you have no choice but to see people as subhumans because your empire is going to have to be built over top of them. So out of necessity, you're going to have to see them as expendable. And so it doesn't matter whether you say so explicitly like a Hitler would or like a Trump would, or whether you try to hide it up with bullshit empathy like some Democrats try to do, and not even very well anymore. I mean, Clinton's remarks in Michigan were like a fucking Nazi, right? He was just out of his mind. So yeah, so I don't agree. I think that not only fascism but liberalism always involves race hatred. I think it's a necessity because capitalism comes with this need to dominate, to expand, and the people who are the victims of that, they're inevitably going to be seen as expendable and as less than human. That's always been the case. So just with Nazism though, it was just more explicit. It was more open, and what the real novelty was that he brought it to Europe. The idea of bringing colonialism, the colonialist tactics, right into Europe. Building the superstate right in Europe. That was the big innovation that set him apart. But it wasn't the virulence of his. I'm not shocked by his bloodlust or by his desire to reshape everything through violence and mass murder. That's standard Western practice, Western imperial practice. So no, that doesn't shock me. What were the things that shocked me was the things I didn't know were like his love of the British Empire, just how much of a Western imperialist he was. His love of the British Empire, the way he equated his anti-Semitism and his anti-Marxism were so closely linked. Those were things that I didn't appreciate before reading the book.
Interesting. And what do you think? Uh, what do you think mainstream education systems, which do teach World War II, I think ad nauseum, and I don't think in an honorable way. But what do you think? The kind of World War II industry, even folks who I think have good intentions when they do want to teach their students that Hitler wasn't just some freak of nature, and so they teach so they teach Nazism the way I think you're trying to teach us in the review of your book. But what do you think a majority of them completely get wrong when they teach World War II and Hitler as a person and so forth?
Oh, there's a lot of information. Basically, like I say, it's like he was a one-time freak. He was just somebody that came out of nowhere, did evil things, was incredibly racist. But so we had to go to war with him to take him down. That's the whole misconception. Hitler developed because he was anti-communist. He was coddled and tolerated for long because they thought they could use him to destroy the Soviet Union. They thought he could do the heavy lifting for them, but eventually his ambitions conflicted with theirs. When he started to take over not just Poland but also uh, to take over. He started to clash with the Britain over their colonies in the Middle East, and so that's where you see that he was an inter-imperialist rivalry, as there was in World War One, right? Where the imperialists sometimes will go to war with each other over the spoils of the plunder. So that's what Hitler eventually he miscalculated, and he also, I think, Stalin played it like, people go on Stalin. They go on and on about his pact with non-aggression pact, but that was because the Western Europeans absolutely refused to form a common front against him, because they knew that Hitler, and if they read Mein Kampf, they were correct. Hitler had the Soviet Union in his sight. That's what he wanted to destroy. So what Stalin effectively did was, he when he was rebuffed, he said, okay, you're not going to link up with us, then we're going to stand back, and we're going to force you into this fight, because by forming that pact, that forced the Western Europeans to take some of the burden of fighting Hitler. And even with that, it's a basic fact that the majority of the fighting and the dying that was done to bring down Hitler was done by the Soviet Union. And that's, if you talk about miseducation, that's just a basic fact that just you just don't learn about unless you really look for it. And that's something certainly that I didn't realize, growing up all through grade school, high school, the kind of education I got. That's certainly not what I learned.
Well. That being said, don't you think that we actually should be learning more about the Spanish Civil War? However, and I think it's up to the teachers, however much they want to talk about. But I find we cannot talk about the outbreak of World War II without talking about the Spanish Civil War. And hey, talk about inconvenient truths and a lot of myths, but one of the big inconvenient truths is that basically the West de facto supported Nazism. The
Oh
West
yeah.
was completely fine letting I hate to use the Orwellian term, but the West was completely fine letting a democratic socialist government in the form of the Spanish Republic be pummeled by these reactionary forces led by Franco that wanted to restore the monarch, which he did. The West simply let that happen, and with allowing Hitler and Mussolini to support Franco, and then the only government that pushed back against it was the Soviet Union. Now, you can criticize what the Soviet Union did in terms of supporting one faction and allowing the stupid inner fights that happen between leftists, the communists against the anarchists against the communists, the social democrats against both, and so forth. But Stalin was the one that was pushing back against Hitler, while FDR, William Mackenzie King, whoever was president of France, and again the British just literally sat on their asses and didn't do anything. Right?
Right. Yeah. And also, but I think what's really important is also to focus on the kind of thing Justin is focused on. Justin Pudor, in his podcast, talking about the scramble for Africa, about Western colonialism, and about its many atrocities all over the globe. And this is where you really get the key insight that Western imperialism was always genocidal, and again, Hitler's innovation was bringing it into Europe, trying to build this super state in Europe. That's I think the Spanish Civil War, obviously, where you could talk about a lot of things, and about the way World War II was fought, and about the aftermath, how denazification was not really allowed to take place. Hence, we have, even today, we have the entire parliament standing to applaud a Nazi, because the denazification was stalled so completely that so many Nazis came to Canada and found refuge and prosperity here. So yeah, there's lots of threads to pull on. But I think the one that's perhaps most important is just the fact that colonialism, that's been around for 500 years. That is the foundation of Hitler. That is the foundation of Nazism. This need for expansion, for dispossessing and plundering people all over the world. So you have to see them as inhuman. You have to be willing to kill. And we're seeing that again in Gaza. If you're going to build a colonial settler state anywhere, you're going to have to do a lot of killing, a lot of gruesome things to maintain that. You can't have it any other way.
Before we talk about before I get to that second to last topic of Zionism, in Israel, and why we need to stop being afraid to comparing it to Nazism. Uh, so before we talk about that, let's talk
I
about
think
our good friend
if,
George. Or let's talk about
yeah.
our good. Oh,
Let me just say, I don't think it's also fear. I don't think I was afraid to compare, like back, like I said, in 2014. I wasn't afraid to compare Zionism to Nazism. That's what wasn't what stopped me. I just didn't know enough. I didn't understand it enough. I didn't understand Nazism enough. So I think that so yeah, there are. I mean, we're accustomed to seeing cowardly politicians who uh, can't say the truth, no matter how obvious it is. But I think it also a lot of cases just misinformation. People are just not informed enough, not educated properly, and it's a process for all of us to learn, to constantly evolve, so we can get to where we need to be.
but before we talk about that, let's talk about our good friend George Orwell. uh, So George Orwell, I don't think we cannot underestimate just how influential this pseudo leftist is when it comes, on the Western left, especially when we talk about anti-communist leftism. I mean, he influences so many Trotskyist groups, from the really bad ones to even, the ones who I agree with on most issues, but find guys to the great Professor Noam Chomsky and so forth. And even when people use terms like "I'm a democratic socialist," "I'm not a socialist like the USSR," that actually comes from George Orwell explicitly himself. And yet we completely, at our own imperil, if we dig deep into his politics, we actually you actually will find at best a pseudo leftist, and a person who's not a revolutionary, and the guy who spends most of his time hating on communism more than anything else. Hence why he can write a book like 1984, which was explicitly to shit on the USSR, which had just liberated Eastern Europe and much of Europe from the Nazis, but not write anything very critical about the Nazis. And I believe I think it was in your review, or certainly it was in the footnotes, that if you actually read George Orwell's review of Mein Kampf, yeah, he mocks Hitler, blah blah blah, blah and so forth, but doesn't but in his review of Mein Kampf, he actually still thinks that Hitler is a much better person, that the West should at least have détente with, compared to the bloodthirsty Joseph Stalin of the USSR. Correct?
I think to be got to be a little precise here. He said he reviewed Mein Kampf, and I mentioned this in the review. He reviewed Mein Kampf and said he passed over in silence all the racist things that Hitler said about Africans, about peoples in the Americas, all because he expressed racism against basically the entire world that wasn't German, right? Or white, because he and Hitler and Orwell also skipped over his deep admiration for the British Empire, and he suggested that after he that Hitler would far from. I mean, he definitely wanted Germany to be superior to Britain. He wanted Germany to be the leading imperial state, and he was willing to fight for that. But he did not have the kind of race hatred for the British, or even for the Americans, that he had for the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe. So he's basically being very dishonest in that. And what's more shocking though is when he says in the review that despite everything, he just can't help but like Hitler. He actually said that explicitly. He said, "Now look, I would kill him because he's an enemy, right? I would kill him if I had the chance, if I could, because he's an official enemy. I can do my." But he made it sound like it was something he would do almost like. But I would feel no malice. Like I would do it as I like, as if he would do it like, yeah, it's an unpleasant duty I'd have to carry out. Because and you just got to think about what kind of asshole says. I'm reading this book, which is just wall to wall racism, wall to wall dehumanization of entire swaths of the world's peoples, and he says he still likes the guy. Like what is going on in the mind that says that? That's not a healthy. That's somebody who's obviously been corrupted by a great deal of Western supremacy. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, and when you go into now that's what I got from his review. That already exposes what a creep he was. Okay, but what you also get from if you read this other book called The Cultural Cold War.
Yeah,
Yeah, I forget. Sorry, I always Francis something. I forget her name.
Francis
Stone.
Fox Piven.
No, I forget her name. She's the author. It's you guys can look at it, Google it. Just look up the Cultural Cold War. Is that the CIA? They really wanted. They had a whole department, let's say, or a certain uh, people heavily invested in promoting what they call was a compatible left, a left that they thought they that undermined communism, right, undermined Marxism, and they went after to sought out permission from Orwell's widow to promote Animal Farm. And so they were very interested in promoting that kind of leftist, that kind of anti-communist, the kind of leftist who said he reads Mein Kampf and says he likes Hitler, you know. Just that alone should make it. And I see his apologists, he engaged with his okay, but he said he would kill him. Yeah, he said he would kill him, but feel no malice. I mean, that's how much he liked him. He's like, he would like killing him would be a duty, like that he'd have to perform, unpleasant duty he'd have to perform. Yeah, I mean, he's just appalling. He's a terrible person. Yeah, just a Western imperialist basically, and the CIA identified that, and they promoted his work because of it.
But you know what I might be well. This is probably conspiracy theories, but you know that George Orwell's voice has never actually been heard, even though he has been apparently a BBC journalist, but apparently his real voice has never been heard, and apparently like the recordings that he made on BBC radio and so forth have all been lost. I find that quite interesting, and so 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 sometimes I wonder if George Orwell was even a real person, because how do you get a person like this who apparently was a war correspondent during the Spanish Civil War, and again, it seems as if he spends more time going after Stalin and the communists than the actual aggressors of the Spanish Civil War, which is Franco, who's being Western backed. So sometimes I wonder, uh, is George Orwell actually like completely fake, and he's just used as this person to really, uh, you know, get Western leftists in some kind of a cult to make them just completely hate you know
Yeah,
communism more than they
I don't
hate
think
Nazism and whatnot.
I don't think they have to invent people. I mean, Bertrand Russell was real, indisputably real.
Ooh,
He was
okay,
he was
careful. You're
he
gonna
was
you're gonna insult Bertrand Russell.
well, yeah, because he was part of the he was part of the whole of setup. He was part of the this anti-communist uh uh committee, like some kind of cultural freedom committee set up by the CIA. He was part of it. So and he was deeply anti-communist, and like he was somebody I admired greatly growing up, reading his books, mainly for his views on religion, which I was very interested in, and but uh, reading him now, just recently reading, for example, about his trip to Russia, and reading an essay he wrote called "Why I'm Not a Communist." And things of that nature, then you realize, wow, he really was an anti-communist, and yeah, quite a chauvinist, quite a Western chauvinist when it came down to it. So I don't think they need to invent people. I'd be surprised. I haven't looked into any conspiracy theory that Orwell wasn't real. If I had to put money on it, if I were forced to put money, I'd say he was real, because there's all kinds of people who are real leftists who really do, will intentionally or not, they adopt these views that serve the interests of of Western imperialism. So that's how I see that.
Unbelievable. And we're gonna have to, and actually, well, we'll definitely be in correspondence about Bertrand Russell. So feel free to send me anything about him that you say. Yeah, don't ever get into this guy. But then,
I mean, reading people is fine. I mean, like I read Hitler. I mean, reading people is one thing. It's when it's reading them and not it's and having blind spots. That's the problem. Right?
then let's get into our final topic, and that is, of course, Zionism, the very, very thorny topic. Well, it shouldn't be a thorny topic, but it is a thorny topic. Zionism, and and now I follow you on Twitter. So again, let's begin when we talk about Zionism. Why again? Why you're not afraid to call Israel Nazi Israel and so forth, and why folks should stop the self-censorship where, okay, we can call Israel an apartheid state and compare it to South Africa, and we can call Israel a southern colonial state and compare it to Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. But no, we cannot call Israel Nazi Israel, even though I mean, even though I know many people who are survivors of World War II, who are World War II descendant Jewish anti-Zionists, they are the ones who use they use it, and I think, okay, you have the license to use it, but even I myself feel the need to self-censor myself. But go right ahead.
You feel? I'm sorry, I don't understand. You feel the need to self-censor yourself? How?
When it comes to comparing Israel explicitly to the Nazis.
Well, I mean, there are like 2.4 million people in Gaza. So, I mean, in a really reductionist, kind of dumb way, yeah, I say, well, they'll never be able to equal Hitler's death toll, even if they killed everyone in Gaza, right? They'll never equal the 5 to 6 million that Hitler killed during the Holocaust. But that's not a comparison that makes a lot of sense, because it's not about you could say, yeah, well, the scale of the atrocities were smaller because the populations were smaller that you were dealing with, but the whole mentality that these were an inferior people, that it's okay to exterminate, uh, based on a racist, in this case, Jewish supremacy. It's really European Jewish supremacy, right? Because Israel was a project of European Jews who look down on the Palestinian Jews and other, because Judaism is a religion, it's not a race. Okay, so that's just a basic fact, right? But it becomes seen as the European Jews who came to Palestine saw themselves as racially superior and entitled to just drive the Palestinians off the land and dispossess them and murder them, and that need to do so has only intensified, because the bottom line is that the diaspora Palestinians, the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, the Palestinians in Syria, in the Golan Heights, and in Israel proper, the minority in Israel property, they all outnumber the so-called the Jews in Israel. So, I mean, can you imagine if in Canada, I mean, the indigenous people here are now reduced to like something like 5% of the population. I think it's similar to the United States. But imagine if the situation were, well, I mean, we don't have to imagine. We know what happened when they were a much larger percentage. They were subjected to genocide, right? But they were subjected to genocide centuries, or they still are, because it's an ongoing process. But the bloodiest period of it was centuries ago, where it was not even it wasn't live streamed like we're seeing in fact, even the Holocaust in Europe wasn't live streamed like we're seeing the Holocaust in Gaza. So I don't have any reluctance, because you're talking about the mass extermination of hundreds of thousands of people because of their race. I mean, if you can't compare that to Nazism, then I don't see what you can compare to Nazism. I mean, it's again feeding this myth that's very damaging, that sees the Nazis as one-time freaks and not seeing them as, in fact, a product of Western imperialism, as an extension of, a product of, a variation of Western imperialism, which is exactly what Zionism is.
I mean, Netanyahu used a quote of the Bible where Moses commits mass genocide against another, Jewish tribes. I believe it was the Amalek or something like that.
No, that's Joshua. Joshua.
Yeah,
Book of
and
Joshua.
have
Joshua has actually, God has the sun stand in, to help them with the genocide. According to the Bible, God actually stops the sun in the sky to help prolong the day so that the Jews can more effectively exterminate the Amalek, including all the women, all the children, including the infants, and it says explicitly, you must exterminate everybody: the women, the children, the infants, even the animals, everything. So, and that's in the Old Testament. To refer, those are explicitly genocidal passages. And again, how can you not equate that? It's there's one critique of using Nazis, of the using calling the Israelis Nazis, or calling the American, because I call Biden and Harris Nazis as well too. And Trudeau and all of them. They're all Nazified. They're all part of this genocide, so they deserve it. And now the one critique of that is that, well, by doing that, you're exceptionalizing the Nazis as if they were the ultimate evil, whereas the what it kind of diminishes, somehow takes away from the all the other evils of the past 500 years of Western colonialism. But I don't see that's I don't see that as
that
very.
is that is somebody really doing mental gymnastics and saying, just don't call Israel Nazis. Like,
Yeah.
wow, the mental gymnastics somebody has to do to get into an argument with you. Just like, for fuck's sakes, many people do compare like Israel to
Oh,
apartheid South Africa, or
yeah.
Israel to
You
to
can you
our
can
settler colonialism of the U.S., Canada, New Zealand, and
you can nitpick any comparison. It's always possible to nitpick. Like even comparing South Africa to Israel, in some ways it's worse, or whatever. That Israel is worse, for example. And so it's not a fair comparison because it's too nice to the Israelis in a way. Because, but you can always nitpick any comparison because historical analogies are never exact. And we could, I think that's a point Justin makes. Sometimes you can run into trouble looking for historical analogies. For example, in 2009 and 2014, the Israelis engaged in this mass killing of Palestinians, but then the Americans basically told them, "Hey, all right, enough," and called it off. Okay, you've done it. All right, you proved your point. Stop it, and basically called them off. This time, I think Justin's correct that the Israelis are probably even surprised themselves that they're not calling them off. They're not giving it, because then the Israelis could say, "Oh, we would have done more, but the Americans cut us off." Like the Americans are saying, "No, just keep going." Okay, so there's a danger sometimes when you use analogy; it's always going to be the same the next time around, right? In fact, if you read Raoul Hilberg, now you mention it, one of the reasons that the Holocaust was the Holocaust was because of the lack of a historical analogy. They just assumed, this will end, it won't go too far. It just didn't have a precedent, so people didn't think it was going to progress like it did. So you can run into trouble looking for analogies all the time because history repeats itself, but it doesn't always repeat itself in exactly the same way, and unprecedented things do happen. So there's always ways to nitpick comparisons, is all I'm trying to say. So not you're calling them Nazis, you can nitpick it all you want, but it is what we've been taught to see as the ultimate evil. And I say, if we're going to see, and it is an extreme evil, and if you're gonna understand it, then well, it's perfectly appropriate when you see something that's so similar in so many ways to what the Nazis did. Then we should weaponize that term against it. Okay, to drive home the point that this is an evil that you guys talk about. What would you have done while the Holocaust was going on? Well, now whatever you're doing now, that's what you would have done while Germany was exterminating Jews in ovens. In fact, this is in some ways worse because it's being live streamed. The technology wasn't there in the 1940s for us to see in real time what was going on.
yes, exactly. And not only that, but like so much of what we even call international law and so forth was all done specifically even the whole concept of when a war happens, that you have war crimes, that you cannot wage aggressive wars, all of that because of the horrors of World War II, and yet America gets to do every single crime against humanity and never punished, along with its friends, the Canadians, the British, and
Yeah.
so forth. Australia never gets sanctioned for the apartheid it's done. When you do have an apartheid in South Africa, it's backed by the West, and then you have this. I don't know how you even describe the state of Israel apart from Southern colonialism, a Jewish supremacist state. But this is a fucking pirate state which literally gets away with doing unbelievable crimes against humanity, and yet the West continues to support it, turning their own international law inside out on its head. Correct?
Yeah, in fact, that's like another point Justin makes, Podor makes all the time, that I think is a really great point, is that there's really no need to see them as separate. There's really no need to see Israel as anything more than like the 51st state. It is the U.S. There is no real distinction. And I say it because Chomsky used to say this thing. Well, if you're gonna, because he would make this argument against sanctions on Israel by saying, well, it's hypocritical to sanction Israel and not sanction the U.S. No, it's not, because they're the same damn thing. Israel is just an outpost of the U.S. that's more vulnerable to sanction than the rest of the United States. That's all. They are the same fucking thing. They are exactly the same thing.
Then one last thing I actually wanted to talk to you about. So this is a bonus I did because we have to talk about this. We do have to talk about this. So I know on Twitter you you called out the left, rightly so, because there's two very, 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 very annoying trends that so-called leftists, even the best of the left that we admire, engage in, and that is the following: praising people like Fucker Carlson because he speaks out against anti-Russia conspiracy theories, and they prop him up to high heavens, even though he has grotesque far-right politics. And then we have, I'm not entirely against the whole left-right alliance. Like, look, if you want to go on some libertarians program because they invite you to talk about anti-imperialist things, by all means, go ahead. But the moment you start to engage in transphobia and you start to prop these guys up as, as honest actors, that's where I have a problem with. And then you got, you have people who won't go on programs like this because it's too small for them, and some, stuff like that. But they'll go on the biggest waste of oxygen in the world, which is Piers Morgan, an entirely piece of shit human, an entirely piece of shit person. Although I don't find him a person, and go like, yeah, I really like, I really like, owns Piers and his stupid like panel, when no, you actually just feed into that guy's ego. He thrives on pissing you guys off, and he continues to do his junk journalism. And the more people watch him, the less they know. So I was wondering if you can talk about that, and the fact that so much of the left plays footsie with the far right in the form of Brexit, or say things like, yeah, Bolsonaro's a terrible person, but Lula didn't do a good job with crime, so ergo. And I was wondering if you, so I was wondering if you could talk about that. I know it's a lot of different things I just threw at you, but I was wondering if you could, reflect on any of that.
I don't know. I think a lot of that stems from the left's inability. A lot of it stems from the same mentality that gets people trying to reform the Democratic Party, or this idea that you have to link up with bigger people and somehow piggyback on bigger things. And sometimes the bigger things are liberal things like the Democratic Party or or sometimes the bigger things are like Joe Rogan or Piers Morgan. But it's always, you have to piggyback on these big things to make yourself relevant and reach people. But what I find is that so often the people who have that mentality just end up just not being very good. just basically just get sucked into just being apologists for one faction or another. Either they're apologists for the for the so-called progressive Democrats who are horrible, or apologists for the certain right wing elements, and you know, and again, this whole idea that you can throw certain people under the bus, like trans people or whatever. Yeah, that's horrific. Who can trust somebody who's willing to make that calculation, right? And the thing with Piers Morgan, like he's basically what his show does. You watch his show; it's all about keeping with the exception of Morandi, Sayed Morandi, who's because he's the only guy he's from Iran, and he's basically the guy that the media used to say we're going to beat up on Moran by beating up on Morandi. And Morandi's excellent, and he stands his ground. But he's from Iran. I don't get the sense from him that he's going there to reach people as so much as to just fight the corner of Iran wherever he can. I don't see him as trying to build a platform, piggyback off that to somehow build a platform for himself. But with many others, I do get the sense that they have this idea that that's going to make them big or make them more influential. And I think all that Piers Morgan does is he just keeps debate just totally stuck at square one. You're going to go do a show, and all he's going to do is just scream at you, okay, but do you commend Hamas? What about the raped babies? What about the beheaded babies? Blah, blah, blah. And he's just going to scream and waste time and keep the debate stuck nowhere. So yeah, your face is on TV, you're getting more notice or whatever. But if that's so effective, like, then when are you going to stop? Like, okay, if it's so effective, when can you stop doing it? Like, how many Piers Morgan's appearances are you going to do? You say, when are you going to say, okay, I got the clicks, now I can take off and and cash them in, when you get to that point. In fact, if the other left guy, even if you didn't, if the other left people, if that was such a great strategy, then you should have been able to actually cash in on the other left people who went there. The people should have been drawn to them and therefore drawn to you, whoever else. But I don't see that as working. I see that as just as people keeping the debate stuck at square one, and never getting beyond, being able to have an intelligent discussion. Just keep inciting against Palestinians and using you as the punching bag to do it. So no,
And do you find that is the curse though of social media, where I'm pretty sure if I was to talk to some of the folks who I do admire who do go on Piers Morgan, and I was to say to them, why are you wasting your time on a guy who's such a waste of oxygen, uh, space, and human flesh?
the
Like,
only the only rationale, I don't think it's a particularly good. So, well, there is a big audience and I'm reaching people. Okay, but if you've already been on there once, if you've been on there once, like, do you think you need to go on again? Like, who do you think you're reaching? Like, if somebody's tuning in regularly to get to Piers Morgan, like, what kind of garbage is already in their brain? Like, it just speaks to me to this low confidence that they can actually build something independent of their own, and that they always have to piggyback off something else. I don't think that's a good way to operate. I think you have to have the confidence to try to build on their own audience, and try to build things. If you do that for long enough. But the problem is, if you get sucked into being an apologist for the people have wasted decades trying to reform the Democratic Party, being apologists for people like Sanders and or whoever the latest so-called progressive is, or Barbara Lee or Maxine Waters, whoever they've been around longer, only to see them do things like talk about how great John McCain was and stuff. It just say, wow, you spent decades doing that instead of trying to promote some kind of independent party, independent politicians who are actually willing to take proper stands. So I think it's a long process, and I don't think we have time to waste trying to reform people who are unreformable. The Western media is unreformable. If they thought you were such a threat, they wouldn't allow you on. They wouldn't have you on. So you got to try to build something independent of them, not subject to their constraints.
I once liked what Ralph Nader used to say. He used to say that way before the anti-war movement of the 1960s, he said that in order for a just world to be built, you did not need a million something people. You just needed a good 200 something people to be committed to change the world for a better place. And I find with social media, people are so obsessed, even if they claim they're not, but people are so super obsessed with how many likes, how many hearts I'm getting,
Yeah, well, that's so
and
manipulated, but now everyone knows that's. I mean, maybe 10 years ago that wasn't so manipulated, but now everyone can see how totally manipulated that is. The algorithms are just ridiculous, you know. Uh, Everyone can see that now. So yeah, it's a people have been arguing with me about.
and then the other funny thing. Sorry to interrupt, though. Is this is as you know, like the Jimmy Dore show, which I thought was a really great, comedic leftist show. I mean, it was against the two-party system. It was defending Joe Stein, would do these really great critiques of other comedians who were such bootlickers, as you mentioned, for the Democratic Party, especially the Obama faction. And I don't know what happened with COVID, but COVID made a lot of people go, and 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 yeah, and he just becomes like this rabid like anti vaxer, and he feels the need to have RFK Jr. on the show. Russell Brand, who was this like anti-establishment left leaning folk, is now embracing Jordan Peterson. Ron DeSantis is endorsing Donald Trump and so forth. And then you had like the gray zone was propping up RFK Jr. until he started to open his mouth on Israel and was waving the Israeli flag with Rabbi Schmuckley, whatever his name is. And yeah, then in England you see just so many left, so much of the left that supported Brexit, even though it was clearly in the hands of the far right and so forth, all engage in transphobia and just complain about too much wokeism and stuff like that. So, I'm curious, your thoughts on that, and is that a deeper reflection of the fact that the oligarchs, like the Elon Musks of the world, just have so much influence that they can, infect sometimes the best, sometimes the supposedly best of the left.
Yeah, there's all kinds of splinter issues, the issues that split people, like the COVID response and that. Yeah, sure. Uh, but again, I mean, basically, the one common thing I see is this idea that we have to piggyback off these already existing establishment organizations, parties, media outlets, that somehow we have to piggyback off them in order to get anything done. It just hasn't worked. It just hasn't worked. Uh, so I think people need to focus on. I don't think there's any easy way to do things. To build a mass movement of alternative political parties supported by alternative media is just to do it. So yeah, I personally I don't think the establishment media or establishment parties have any already of use to us. Uh, if we were really, it is the case, if you start to build an independent movement supported by independent media, it will, when it happens to us, maybe even now it is happening to an extent where that's why they're trying to censor us. They'll try to censor you, and part of the process, what they'll do is they'll try to co-opt you. They'll, maybe some of us will get invites, right? And say, hey, because they'll want it. That's part of the thing that happens. But I think we have to maintain our independence. I think that's crucial. That's how I see it. If all these people who advocated compromising or reforming the Democratic Party and all this kind of stuff, if they were if they were correct, I don't think we'd be. I don't see how could we be seeing the Holocaust in Gaza. How could this be happening if what they were if the if the strategic choices they made were the correct ones? Then how can we possibly be at this place?
And I promise this will be my last question, Joe, but I have to ask this question, which is about Palestinian resistance, because you've also have called out fellow leftists who who condemn Hamas's attack on October the 7th and so forth. And now I'm of I'm of the opinion that I have no I have no I'm not going to lecture the Palestinians on how they should resist. I can certainly give an opinion, and if they listen to it, whatever. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not the one that's living under a brutal occupation. Ergo, I would have no idea what I would do under the circumstances. The Palestinians have responded in both nonviolent action, which never gets any attention, but also with but also with armed struggle. And international law is on the side of the Palestinians that they have every right to resist their occupier, to quote Malcolm X, by any means necessary. Uh, so so even if somebody may not agree with the Palestinian resistance and the attack on October the 8th, I certainly don't endorse, kidnapping people. But why do you think uh, why do you think we actually should not be spending any time even talking like that, and just let the Palestinians do the resistance, and it's just up to us to engage in, BDS and whatnot.
Well, and I think it's up to us to applaud the Palestinian armed resistance of October 7th. I think October 7th was a heroic and very courageous act of armed resistance. If you look at one of the UN reports in particular, it stays, it's kind of, it says something which really should floor anybody. But on October 7th, the Palestinians overran at least, the words are at least 8 military bases. That because Israel keeps military bases very close. It's very highly, very close to Gaza, because Gaza is basically a concentration camp. So the Palestinians broke out of the concentration camp, overran 8 military bases, and capturing soldiers. I don't see how anyone can condemn that. They captured soldiers to engage in a prisoner exchange for people, Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. So I don't see how anyone can condemn. In fact, the heroism encouraged that Palestinians have displayed on that day and throughout the past year, I think should be applauded by that. It's not just a matter of like, don't condemn. It's exact opposite. We need to applaud that. They're fighting, they're defending themselves, and I don't see. I should applaud that same way I see someone fights back against a mugger. What am I going to condemn them for it? If they have no other option, a mugger is going to kill them anyways. If some kind of deranged monster who's determined to kill them, and they fight back rather than just meekly accepting their fate, of course I'm going to applaud the courage of the people who did that. So that's my position on October 7th. Now there are complexities. Any act of armed resistance, there are complexities. There are bystanders who are killed. There were people taken. There were non-fighters who broke through the fence as well, and did things that might have done things that were not legal under national law or laws of war or whatever. But I mean, any armed struggle, World War II, the fight against the Nazis. I mean, was everything done by the Allies against the Nazis by the book according to international law? No. But do we condemn the fight? We shouldn't. I mean, that just be crazy. So that's my position on the armed struggle there. And also, if you look into the details, like Electronic Intifada has shown that the hundreds of it's definitely that the Israelis definitely killed hundreds of their own people, because they were so disorganized, so caught unaware, and so fearful of captives being taken, that they opted to actually just let loose with a massive firepower that killed hundreds of their own people on that day, on October 7th. So the Electronic Intifada has extensive research on that people should look into. But just even looking at the UN reports, which bend over backwards to try to support the Israelis, they admit that there were at least 8. They didn't even say 8. They said at least 8 military bases that were overrun by the Palestinians on October 7th. You can't get a more targeted military action than that. This was not them, just barging into shopping malls or something. This was them going after at least 8 military bases. So I support, I applaud that act of courage. I have no patience.
But then I'm curious. What do you think of the I don't know who started it. It might have been Seymour Hersh, but it was one. Well, several folks have been saying this. Those who follow Israeli politics closely, those who are Israeli journalists who are anti-Zionists have said this, have said a version of this, that because of Benjamin Netanyahu and the far right government's very unpopular judicial reforms, which would overhaul the Supreme Court, which because of the far right coalition would roll back queer, civil rights, feminist, women's rights, and all the kind of social liberalism that Israel often uses to say we're the only democracy in the Middle East. That because of that, uh, basically Netanyahu allowed Hamas to attack, what they did on October the 7th, to distract the Israeli public from his petty corruption scandals, from the unpopular far right regime he had made, and ergo to unite the country. Of course, look what the Palestinians have just did. So I'm curious your response on that, because I've moderated debates on if wars are ever justifiable. And every time we get to the issue of Ukraine and Palestine, I always ask the question to those who say, to those who are defending Russia's special military operation or Palestinian armed resistance, that isn't it counterproductive when the IRA blows up a pub and it kills innocent people, when the Palestinians do a suicide bombing or what they did on October the 7th? It often makes the very people they claim they want to address their grievances be more supportive of the very reactionary state, which has now just used their act of resistance against them to do more horrendous things, like what we see right now with the ongoing genocide.
Well, non-resistance does the same thing, though. I mean, if the Palestinians have been under siege, under a very brutal siege since 2000. They've been dispossessed for 76 years. It doesn't matter what they do. They're going to steal their land and kill them. They're going to do it slowly and quietly, or the Palestinians are going to fight back and defend themselves, as they have every right to do. So if you show weakness, that encourages the abuser to go after you more. Oh, he's weak. I'm going to try for more. If he fights back, yeah, oh, look, he's a savage. I'm going to fight. I mean, there's always an excuse for the abuser to do the abuse, right? So whether it's what we should be doing is we should be on the side of the victim. Say, well, the victim, if they say the attack was counterproductive, well, then how do we make it more productive then? How do we make the resistance more productive? What are we doing about that? Well, the answer is exactly fuck all, because the people who critique the resistance don't want the resistance to be productive. If they're honest, do you want Nazi Israel to be overthrown? I do, don't you? Right? Do we want the resistance to be productive? I mean, you're saying people are saying it's counterproductive. Okay, well, what are you going to do to make it productive then? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's an honest concern. I think it's just an excuse to shit on Palestinian armed resistance. They have every right to resist. It's a long shot. A lot of revolts were long shot. The slave revolts were long shots, right? The indigenous people who resisted the genocide in our own continent, in the Western Hemisphere where I live, resistance was a long shot. The Haitian slave revolution was a long shot. Okay, that doesn't make it mean that it wasn't right. All right, and if whose side are we on? That's the other question we have to ask. We should be on the side of people doing the resisting.
And I promise this is the final question. Which is, if because I like what you just said, because now I sometimes wonder if the people who did the attack on October the 7th, if they were secular Palestinians, if they were communist Palestinians, if they were just like a broad church of left Palestinians, and there was women leading it, and they weren't wearing, a scarf over their head, would we really be spending all this time doing these stupid mental gymnastics of the Piers Morgan of the world, that the BBC, the Fox Noise, the National Post, the CBC go, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? Of course, Hamas, because it is an Islamic conservative movement, people feel like they're like shout like, well, I don't support them, but it's like at the same time, well, but if this was a secular movement that did the attack, would you be supporting them, or would you still find these kind of mental gymnastics ways of saying I don't support armed resistance. I only like it when people do Gandhi's way and Martin Luther King Jr.'s way. Curious your thoughts on that.
I'm not sure what your question is, to be honest with you.
Well,
Like,
I mean, well, because I think a lot of people feel they have to condemn Hamas because Hamas is in Islamic resistance to Israel. But I wonder if this wasn't Hamas that did the attack, if it was some secular, under Western lens, some secular, communistic resistance, would people still feel the need to condemn, Palestinian resistance, or actually what they applaud it?
well, I mean, a lot of the same opportunists who shit on the Palestine, who shit on Hamas, will also shit on Maduro, who they'll say he's not really left wing. They'll also shit on Evo Morales. I mean, the people who want to make those kind of calculations, they're going to do them. It doesn't matter. They'll say the Soviet Union wasn't really left wing either. I mean, they'll find something, right? So there's opportunists like that. But in terms of, I mean, we have an organized movement that's resisting genocide, and to bring up whether you think they're Islamist, like, I think that's obscene. Like, who gives a fuck? I mean, they're resisting genocide. They're picking up arms to resist a genocidal state that you should want to see overthrown. I mean, everybody who has an ounce of decency wants to see the Palestinians overthrow Nazi Israel. I don't give a fuck if they're Islamic. Nobody should give a fuck. I mean, that's just crazy. Yeah, so I just have no patience for that. I don't see why that's even a thing. Like, why is that even a concern? Uh, you
Yeah,
know,
it's unbelievable, but it's a bizarre, worthy or unworthy thing because nobody asks the IRA that, nobody ever asked whatever other form of resistance that, and then if you
yeah.
think of I don't know, I think also if you think like if you remember when Yemen was under attack by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Western backed, everybody would be crying and boo-hoo-hooing. Nobody really asked questions about who the Houthis were, what their political formation was, and yet
Right.
you had in Syria Assad's government in Syria, which was also being attacked by Western Gulf, Turkish, Israeli actors who literally, exported ISIS death squads into the countries, also was committing mass genocide against their subjects, and yet people were all doing sorts of weird mental gymnastics like, Assad doesn't have the right to do that. Oh, Assad has been actually killing a lot of his own people. It's like, and it's like, dude, what's he supposed to do? Like, Western Gulf Turkish actors,
And
Israeli
that
actors.
was an Israeli project too. That was an Israeli project, and Israel is possibly going to expand. They've been constantly attacking, bombing Syria. So everyone who took that line, the anti-Assad line, were basically dupes for Israel. That should be undeniably obvious by now. You were duped into supporting a Nazi Israel project of disrupting the resistance by getting rid of Assad. That's just the fact. So yeah, so that should be totally clear by now. Um, yeah, and if also about the factualism, if I just finished, I wrote a review on Substack. You can find it on Substack. Uh, I gotta go soon, Yuri.
No
I'm
problem.
really splitting headache. But let me just say, you can find my writing on Substack nowadays. I don't write for Fair anymore. I write for I write on Substack, and that's basically it. I really I find it just allows me much more freedom to address the topics I want to address, which isn't always media criticism. And for example, I just wrote a review of Sinwar's novel. Sinwar, who's just died very heroically, leader of Hamas. He wrote a novel, and one of the things that struck me of the novel is how respectful he is of all the different factions of the resistance. The PLO supporting factions, the leftist factions. Hamas is not a Hamas is leading a united front against Nazi Israel. That comes out loud and clear in his book. It's essential. They can't afford to be sectarian. They can't afford to shun anybody with a different ideology who's willing to pick up a gun and fight against this genocidal enemy. That has to be understood. So anyone engaging in kind of sectarian complaints against Hamas. They have a they if they're being sincere, they're being just dupes for Nazi Israel is the kindest thing I could say. So,
Well, that's a perfect note to end. We were joined on this edition of One Plus One with our good friend. He's always a returning champion, Joe Emersberger. Who, again, folks, you can check out Joe's work at Fair.org, Zednet, and his own Substack, which I will make sure that people link. Do get the book that he co-wrote with Justin Pordor. With Christmas coming up, I'm going to make sure I get that book. Which plug that book again, Joe, for us.
yeah, it's called Extraordinary Threat. I wrote it with Justin Pordor. It's about the coup attempts on Venezuela.
And yes, and if you're a history buff, do listen to what Joe said about do read Joe's review of Mein Kampf, and I think folks should reread it. And again, the important thing that Joe emphasized: understand that Hitler was not some one-off freak; it was his love letter to Western imperialism. Joe, until then, thank you so much for coming on the program. I hope that headache of yours goes away soon.
Thank you.
And again, thanks for everything, and looking forward. And folks, donate to One Plus One generously, please. Ciao, ciao.
All right. Take care. You take care.